The ancient dragon Pirates felt his life slipping away on the cold stones of Mount Ashfall. His massive golden scales, once bright as the sun, were now fading to a dull gray. Strange wounds across his body leaked not blood, but actual starlight that sparkled and died in the mountain air. He had been fighting for 3 days straight, and his ancient body could take no more. All around him, reality itself was breaking apart. Huge tears in the fabric of space hung in the air like jagged wounds, and through these openings came the most terrifying creatures the universe had ever known. The Void Devourers looked like living shadows that constantly shifted and moved, never keeping the same shape for more than a few seconds. They were pure hunger given form, existing only to consume and destroy everything they touched. Down in the peaceful valley below, the small town of Millbrook slept quietly under the stars. Families were tucked safely in their beds, children dreaming of tomorrow's adventures, parents resting after long days of work. Nobody knew that miles above them, the last battle for their world was being lost. The streetlights glowed softly, casting gentle shadows on empty sidewalks where kids had played just hours before. Pirates had been the guardian of something called the cosmic flame for over 3,000 years. This wasn't just any fire, it was the very thing that kept different dimensions separate from each other. Think of it like an invisible wall that kept the good places safe from the bad places. For all those centuries, he had fought off creatures and forces that wanted to break through and destroy peaceful worlds like Earth. But now that wall was cracking, and with each painful breath the dragon took, the cracks grew wider. The Void Devourers pushed through the gaps like water through a broken dam, more and more of them every second. Soon there would be too many to stop, and they would pour down into the sleeping town below, then spread across the entire planet. Pirates tried to stand one more time, tried to summon his fire for one final attack, but his legs wouldn't hold him. His wings, once powerful enough to create hurricanes, lay broken and twisted on the rocky ground. The cosmic flame inside his chest was growing weaker, flickering like a candle in the wind. In his growing despair, he heard something that made his ancient heart skip a beat. From far below in the valley came the sound of a baby crying. It was coming from a small wooden house on the edge of town, where warm yellow light glowed in the windows. The dragon's incredibly sharp eyes could see through the walls, and there in a simple crib lay a newborn baby boy, maybe only a few days old. The baby belonged to the Washington family. His parents, David and Maya Washington, had just brought him home from the hospital. They had named him Tyrone, and he was their first child. Right now his mother was in the kitchen warming up a bottle, while his father dozed in a chair nearby, exhausted but happy. Pirates knew what he had to do, even though it went against every law of magic and nature. There was a forbidden ritual, something so dangerous that dragons had sworn never to use it. It was called soul binding, and it meant putting a dragon's entire essence into a human being. No dragon had ever tried it before because it was thought to be impossible. Humans and dragons were just too different. "Forgive me, little one," the dying dragon whispered into the wind. "I'm about to change your life forever." He began the ancient ritual, speaking words in a language older than civilization. His remaining strength flowed out of his massive body like liquid gold, streaming down from the mountain top in a river of pure light and power. The cosmic flame that had burned in his chest for millennia left him and traveled through the air, moving faster than lightning toward the small house below. Baby Tyrone was sleeping peacefully when the dragon's fire reached him. For just a moment, his tiny brown eyes opened and blazed with golden light brighter than the sun. Ancient power flowed into his small human body, and somewhere deep in his soul, the essence of the last dragon found a new home. Then his eyes returned to their normal soft brown, and he went back to sleep as if nothing had happened. Up on the mountain, Pirates felt a peace he hadn't known in centuries. His body began to crumble, turning to ash that the wind scattered across the mountainside. But he wasn't really gone, he lived on now in the sleeping baby below. With his final breath, the ancient guardian smiled, knowing that his sacrifice had given the world a new kind of protector. Someone who would be both human and dragon, with the best qualities of both races flowing through their veins. 16 years had passed since that night on Mount Ashfall, and Tyrone Washington had grown into a tall, strong young man living in Detroit. He spent most of his days working at his father's auto repair shop on the east side of the city, getting his hands dirty fixing engines and learning about cars. To everyone who knew him, he seemed like a perfectly normal teenager, maybe a little stronger than most kids his age, but nothing too unusual. But Tyrone wasn't completely normal, even though he didn't understand why. Ever since he was little, he had noticed things about himself that didn't quite make sense. When he got cut or scraped, the wounds would heal much faster than they should. A deep cut that should have taken weeks to heal would be gone in just a few days, leaving barely a scar behind. His parents thought he was just lucky to heal fast. He was also incredibly strong for his size. At school, he had to be careful during gym class not to accidentally hurt other students. When lifting weights, he had to pretend to struggle with amounts that felt light to him. Sometimes during football practice, he would hold back his real speed because running at full power made him faster than seemed humanly possible. The strangest thing, though, were the flickers he saw at the edges of his vision. Sometimes when he was working late at the shop or walking home at night, he would catch glimpses of things that shouldn't be there. Shadows that moved wrong, or brief flashes of light in empty spaces. When he turned to look directly, nothing would be there. He figured maybe he was just tired or his eyes were playing tricks on him. His younger sister Zara was the person he was closest to in the world. She was 13 and went to the middle school just a few blocks from their house. Every day after school, she would walk to the bus stop on Martin Luther King Boulevard to catch the bus that would take her to their grandmother's house, where she stayed until their parents got off work. On this particular Tuesday evening in March, Tyrone was working the late shift at the shop, trying to finish fixing an old Chevy that had been giving him trouble all week. The sun had set hours ago, and the neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional car driving by. He was so focused on the engine that he almost didn't hear the screaming. But when he did hear it, his blood turned cold. It was Zara's voice, and she sounded terrified. Tyrone dropped his wrench and ran outside, following the sound of his sister's cries. What he saw when he reached the bus stop made his mind struggle to understand what was happening. Strange creatures were surrounding Zara, things that looked like living shadows, constantly changing shape and size. They seemed to be made of pure darkness, but a darkness that moved with purpose and hunger. These were the Void Devourers, though Tyrone didn't know their name yet. They had finally found Earth after 16 years of searching, drawn by the faint trace of dragon energy that clung to the planet. The creatures moved like liquid night, reaching out with tendrils of shadow toward his sister, who was pressed against the bus stop sign with tears streaming down her face. Zara! Tyrone shouted, running toward her without thinking about the danger. The creatures turned toward him, and he could feel something cold and wrong emanating from them. It was like standing near a freezer, but instead of cold air, they gave off a chill that seemed to freeze his very soul. One of them reached for him with what might have been an arm, though it kept shifting between different shapes. That's when something deep inside Tyrone's chest exploded into life. Golden fire erupted from his body like a volcano, waves of heat and light pouring out of him in all directions. The flames didn't burn him, instead, they felt warm and protective, like being wrapped in the most comfortable blanket imaginable. But for the shadow creatures, the fire was deadly. Everywhere the golden flames touched them, they dissolved into ash that scattered in the wind. Tyrone's eyes blazed with the same golden light, and for a moment he could see everything with perfect clarity. He could see the fear in his sister's eyes, but also something else, amazement and hope. He could sense that there were more of these creatures throughout the city, hunting for something, though he didn't understand what. When the last of the shadow creatures had been destroyed, the fire faded from his body, and Tyrone collapsed to his knees, exhausted. His sister ran to him and threw her arms around him, her whole body shaking. "Tyrone, what just happened?" Zara whispered, looking at her brother like she was seeing him for the first time. "What are you?" Before he could answer, footsteps approached from behind them. An elderly black man walked out of the darkness, someone Tyrone recognized as Professor Coleman from the community college. The old man's eyes were wide with something that looked like recognition mixed with relief. "You're him," Professor Coleman said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After all these years of watching and waiting, you're finally awakening. You're the one the dragon chose. You're our guardian." Tyrone stared at the professor, his mind spinning with questions he didn't know how to ask. What dragon? Guardian of what? And why did using that golden fire feel so natural, like he had been born knowing how to do it? All he knew for certain was that his normal life had just ended, and something much bigger and more dangerous was beginning. Professor Coleman took Tyrone and Zara to his small office at the community college that night, where dusty books lined every wall and ancient symbols were drawn on whiteboards. Under the dim light of an old desk lamp, he told them a story that sounded impossible but explained everything that had just happened. 16 years ago, the last dragon in existence died protecting our world, the professor began, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he spoke. His name was Pirates, and he had been guarding the barriers between dimensions for thousands of years. When he knew he was dying, he did something that had never been done before. He put his entire soul into a human baby. That baby was you, Tyrone. Tyrone sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was hearing. His sister Zara held his hand tightly, her eyes wide with fear and amazement. The golden fire that had erupted from his body earlier suddenly made sense, but it also made him feel like his entire life had been a lie. "So I'm not really human?" he asked quietly. "You're both," Professor Coleman explained. "You have a human body and a human heart, but you also carry the soul and power of an ancient dragon. That makes you the only thing on Earth that can fight the Void Devourers." Over the next few weeks, Tyrone discovered just how much his life had changed. He could now see things that were invisible to normal people. When he concentrated, his vision would shift and he could peer across the barriers between dimensions, watching the shadow creatures as they gathered in massive numbers, preparing for a full invasion of Earth. The sight of thousands of them moving like a dark ocean made his stomach turn. His physical abilities had grown far beyond human limits. He could breathe fire that burned hotter than any furnace, hot enough to melt through steel doors or turn concrete into liquid. Cuts and bruises healed within minutes, and even serious injuries that should have put him in the hospital would disappear overnight. He was faster than any Olympic sprinter and stronger than any weightlifter. But the hardest part wasn't learning to control these new abilities. The hardest part was fighting the voice in his head that wasn't his own. The dragon's memories whispered to him constantly, especially when he was angry or scared. Ancient thoughts and instincts would bubble up from somewhere deep in his mind, urging him to forget about human concerns and embrace his true nature as a powerful predator. Sometimes he would catch himself thinking about soaring high above the clouds, or hoarding treasure, or ruling over lesser creatures. These weren't his thoughts, but they felt real and tempting. His best friend Jerome, who had known him since elementary school, tried to help him train and stay grounded. They would meet in empty warehouses where Tyrone could practice using his fire without burning anything important. Jerome would talk to him during training, reminding him of their childhood together, of basketball games and video game nights, anything to keep Tyrone connected to his human side. "Remember when we were 8 and you were afraid of the dark?" Jerome would say while Tyrone practiced controlling flames that danced around his hands. "Dragons ain't afraid of the dark, but humans are. Hold on to that fear, man. It keeps you human." His girlfriend Alicia watched from a distance as he struggled with powers that seemed to be consuming more of his personality each day. She had loved the gentle, funny boy who worked at his father's shop and dreamed of maybe opening his own business someday. Now she was watching him turn into something else, something powerful but also dangerous and distant. The military found out about him within a month, and suddenly Tyrone was working with generals and government officials, helping them prepare for an invasion that most people didn't even know was coming. He learned to coordinate attacks with fighter jets and tanks, using his ability to see across dimensions to guide missiles toward Void Devourer gathering points. But the shadow creatures were learning too. Each battle taught them more about Earth's defenses, and they adapted quickly. They started appearing in places Tyrone couldn't reach in time, forcing him to push his powers harder and faster than ever before. The worst moment came during a massive attack on Chicago. Hundreds of Void Devourers poured through dimensional tiers all across the city, threatening millions of innocent people. Tyrone fought for 6 straight hours, his fire burning so hot that it melted the asphalt beneath his feet. He saved countless lives, but somewhere during the battle, he started to lose himself. The dragon's rage took over completely. He stopped thinking about protecting people and started thinking only about destroying enemies. His fire burned hotter and wilder, and he began attacking anything that moved, even police officers and firefighters who were trying to help evacuate civilians. It was his sister Zara's voice that finally brought him back. She had seen the news reports and somehow made it to Chicago, calling his name from across a burning street. "Tyrone, come back to us. You're my brother." Hearing her voice cut through the dragon's fury like a knife. He collapsed to his knees in the middle of the destroyed street, his human consciousness fighting its way back to the surface. "I'm still human," he whispered to himself, but even as he said it, he could feel how much harder it was becoming to believe those words each day. The day the world almost ended started like any other Tuesday morning. People were drinking their coffee, kids were getting ready for school, and nobody knew that in exactly 3 hours, reality itself would tear apart at the seams. At 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time, dimensional rifts opened simultaneously across every continent on Earth. In New York, a massive tear in space appeared above Times Square, spilling shadow creatures onto the crowded streets below. In London, the Thames River turned black as Void Devourers emerged from portals beneath the water. Tokyo's skyline filled with dark shapes pouring through rifts that hung in the air like jagged wounds. Every major city on the planet was under attack at the same time. Tyrone was in Detroit when the invasion began, working with a military team to track dimensional weak points, when alarms started blaring from every direction. The communication center erupted in chaos as reports flooded in from around the world. This wasn't like the smaller attacks they had been fighting for months, this was everything the Void Devourers had, all at once. "Sir, we're getting reports from every continent," a young officer said, her voice shaking as she read from multiple screens. "London, Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, Mexico City, they're everywhere at once." Tyrone felt something shift inside him, like a lock being opened in his chest. The dragon's power surged through his body stronger than it ever had before, and suddenly he could sense the scope of the invasion. Millions of the shadow creatures were pouring through hundreds of dimensional tiers, and conventional weapons were doing nothing to stop them. Tanks, missiles, even nuclear weapons passed right through the creatures like they were made of air. That's when Tyrone realized he would have to become something he had been fighting against for months. He would have to stop holding back. He closed his eyes and let the dragon's power flow through him completely. Golden fire erupted from his body, but this time it didn't fade after a few minutes. Instead, it grew stronger and hotter, until the air around him shimmered with heat that could melt steel. When he opened his eyes, they blazed like miniature suns, and everyone in the room stepped back instinctively. "Get me coordinates for every major attack," he said, his voice carrying an echo that sounded like distant thunder. "I'm going to end this." What happened next had never been done by any dragon in history. Tyrone tore open portals through space itself, stepping through holes in reality that he created with pure willpower. One moment he was in Detroit, the next he was standing on a rooftop in London, surrounded by void devourers that turned to ash the instant his fire touched them. He moved faster than jet planes, appearing in Tokyo just minutes after leaving London, his fire burning through the creature's dimensional armor like it was made of paper. In Sao Paulo, he worked alongside Brazilian military forces, teaching them how to channel their own inner strength to fight enemies that seemed impossible to defeat. Captain Rodriguez in New York watched in amazement as Tyrone appeared in the middle of Times Square, his body glowing like a living star. The young man fought with a combination of human creativity and dragon power that the creatures had never encountered. He used the city's own infrastructure as weapons, turning steam pipes into fire cannons and using electrical systems to create traps that the void devourers couldn't escape. He's not just fighting them, Dr. Chen observed from her research station in Los Angeles, he's rewriting the rules of how this kind of battle can be fought. But the incredible strain was destroying Tyrone's human body from the inside. Each time he opened a portal across the globe, each time he burned hotter than stars, a little more of his humanity slipped away. His physical form was starting to become translucent, like he was turning into living flame held together only by sheer willpower. Alicia found him during a brief moment when he had returned to Detroit to check on his family. She took one look at him and knew that the boy she had fallen in love with was disappearing before her eyes. His skin glowed with internal fire, his hair moved like it was underwater, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the windows vibrate. "You have to stop," she pleaded, grabbing his hands even though they burned to touch. "The world needs you alive, Tyrone. Your sister needs you alive. I need you alive." He looked at her with eyes that held the weight of ancient wisdom mixed with human pain. "The world needs them dead more than it needs me human," he replied, his voice echoing with power that made the ground beneath their feet tremble. She watched helplessly as he opened another portal and stepped through, heading toward Washington, D.C., where the largest concentration of void devourers had gathered around the White House. She knew, somehow, that this would be the last time she would see him as anything resembling the boy she had loved. In the final battle above the nation's capital, Tyrone faced more void devourers than had ever been seen in one place. They moved like a living storm cloud, blotting out the sun and turning day into night. The shadow creatures had learned to work together, combining their power into something that threatened to tear holes in reality so large that entire dimensions might collapse into each other. That's when Tyrone made the choice that would change everything. He stopped trying to maintain his physical form and let himself become what the dragon's power wanted him to be. His body dissolved into pure golden fire, expanding across the entire sky above Washington like a second sun being born. He had transcended the limits of both human and dragon, becoming something entirely new, a conscious force of protective flame that existed beyond the boundaries of flesh and blood. High above Washington, D.C., Tyrone's physical body began to dissolve like sugar in water. His arms and legs became streams of golden light, his chest expanded into a blazing sun, and his face transformed into something beautiful and terrible at the same time. The young man who had once worried about fixing cars and asking girls to prom was becoming something that had never existed before in the history of the universe. His human body fell toward the earth like an empty shell, but what had been inside that body was now spreading across multiple dimensions at once. Tyrone's consciousness stretched beyond the boundaries of time and space, becoming a living force of protective fire that could be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. He could see across infinite realities, watch over countless worlds, and hunt down every single void devourer no matter where they tried to hide. The shadow creatures scattered in terror as Tyrone's new form blazed through dimension after dimension. They had fed on the life force of entire planets, destroyed civilizations that had existed for millions of years, but they had never faced anything like this. Tyrone wasn't just burning them with dragon fire anymore, he was unmaking their very existence, erasing them from reality so completely that it was as if they had never been born. But destroying the void devourers wasn't enough. Tyrone could see that the dimensional barriers were permanently damaged, full of cracks and weak spots that would allow other dangerous creatures to slip through in the future. Using power that went far beyond anything the ancient dragons had ever possessed, he began to rewrite the fundamental laws of reality itself. He sealed every dimensional crack, reinforced every barrier, and created new protections that would last until the end of time. No more invasions would come from the dark spaces between worlds. No more shadow creatures would threaten innocent people while they slept. The universe would be safe, not just for now, but forever. From his new existence as a guardian spirit, Tyrone could watch over Earth and thousands of other inhabited worlds simultaneously. He saw children playing in parks that would have been graveyards if the invasion had succeeded. He watched scientists making discoveries that would help humanity reach for the stars. He observed artists creating beautiful paintings and musicians writing songs that would inspire generations. All of this was possible because he had chosen to give up his human life. But even as he accepted his role as an eternal protector, Tyrone felt the pull of his human heart. He thought about his sister Zara, probably crying somewhere and wondering what had happened to her big brother. He thought about Jerome, his best friend who had always been there to keep him grounded. Most of all, he thought about Alicia, and how she had begged him not to disappear completely. That's when Tyrone decided to give humanity one final gift, something that came from the love he still felt for his family and friends rather than from his dragon power. Before he fully transformed into his new eternal form, Tyrone reached out with his consciousness and gently touched the soul of every human being on Earth. To his sister Zara in Detroit, he gave a spark of his protective fire. To Jerome, he gave a flame of courage that would never be extinguished. To Alicia, he gave a light that would help her find hope even in the darkest times. But he didn't stop with the people he knew personally. Tyrone touched every human soul on the planet, all 7 billion of them. The baby being born in a hospital in Mumbai, the elderly woman feeding pigeons in Central Park, the teenager writing in her diary in Stockholm, the farmer planting seeds in rural Kenya. Each person received a tiny spark of dragon fire, a piece of Tyrone's power that would live inside them forever. This gift wasn't just about giving humans special abilities, though many of them would discover they were stronger, braver, and more resilient than they had ever imagined. It was about ensuring that humanity would never again be helpless in the face of cosmic threats. Zara felt the change immediately. She was sitting in her bedroom, crying and staring at a photo of her and Tyrone at last year's family barbecue, when she suddenly felt warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't scary or painful, it felt like being hugged by her brother, like he was telling her that everything would be okay. Across the city, Jerome was standing on his apartment balcony, looking up at the sky where he had last seen his best friend disappear into light. When Tyrone's gift touched his soul, Jerome straightened up and felt a strength he had never known before. He understood somehow that Tyrone was still with them, still protecting them, just in a different way. Alicia was the last person Tyrone touched, and to her he gave the strongest spark of all. She felt his love wrap around her like a warm blanket, and she knew that even though she would never see his face again or hold his hand, part of him would always be with her. Years later, when new threats emerged from the depths of space, alien invasions, cosmic storms, reality-bending creatures from parallel universes, humanity didn't cower in fear. They stood up and fought back with fire in their hearts and the courage of dragons in their souls. Scientists made impossible discoveries, soldiers performed miraculous feats of heroism, and ordinary people found extraordinary strength when they needed it most. Tyrone Washington, the boy from Detroit who had once worried about being different, had become something beyond human or dragon. He was the eternal guardian, the light in the darkness, the promise that hope would never die as long as humans existed to carry it forward. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, watching over the world he had died to save, Tyrone smiled and knew that his sacrifice had been worth it.